You are sitting at the edge of the firelight, and everyone around you already knows. Nobody has said a word. Nobody will, not tonight. But you feel it in the way the woman across the flames keeps glancing at you in the way the man beside her has gone quiet, in a way that is louder than shouting. Word traveled the way it always traveled here, mouth to mouth, until the whole band carried a piece of information that only two people were supposed to have. You broke something. Not a tool, not a bone, a bond. There is no chief to summon you, no court to stand before, no written law violated, only this circle of faces, lit orange, and the terrible patient machinery of a society without police that is about to decide what happens to you. How does a group with no jail, no judge, and no badge make someone pay for betrayal? For most of the time our species has existed, this was the entire justice system, not a building, not an institution. A few dozen people who had to keep sleeping in the same camp, sharing the same meat, trusting each other with their children, even after one of them broke that trust. The punishment for infidelity in a hunter-gatherer band was not a single event. It was a ladder, and every rung still shapes how you handle betrayal today, whether you have thought about it or not. Start at the bottom rung, because that is where almost everyone stood almost every time. The anthropologist Polly Wiesner spent decades recording actual conversations among the Juhuansi of the Kalahari, real transcribed talk, day after day, night after night. She found something specific and quietly devastating. Daytime conversation among these hunter-gatherers centered on practical matters and on sanctioning gossip. Talk whose entire function was to monitor, judge, and correct the behavior of others in the band. Not idle chatter. A working mechanism. Gossip was not the failure of justice. Gossip was justice, running in the background all day for the entire time anyone can measure. Picture what that meant if you were the one who had strayed. You did not face one accuser. You faced 100 small ones. A pause when your name came up, a joke that landed a half second too sharp, someone repeating just within earshot exactly what you did to someone who did not need to be told. There was no ruling. There did not need to be. The camp had already reached its verdict and delivered it one glance at a time for as long as it wanted. This is the part almost nobody expects. Gossip like this was not a failure of small-scale justice. It was the primary form of it. A survey of more than 100 non-industrial societies, drawing on the standard cross-cultural sample, found reputational punishment, talk, shame, loss of standing, was the sanction most associated with egalitarian bands, the exact kind of small, sharing-based group that dominated most of human history. Harsher penalties existed elsewhere, but in bands most like the ones our ancestors lived in, words did most of the work. If that sounds gentle, you have never had to live inside a group of 30 people for the rest of your life with no ability to just move to another city. There was nowhere to hide from a verdict delivered in gossip, no new job across town, no changing your number. The same faces, every day, for years, possibly for the rest of your life. A modern betrayal can end in an apartment you never see again. An ancestral one played out in front of the same fire, indefinitely, which is exactly why the next rung rarely needed to be climbed. Most people paid the debt in full right here, in the currency of a lowered voice, but some did not, and for them the ladder had a second rung, sharper than the first. Ridicule. Not private disapproval anymore. Public, choreographed, impossible to misunderstand. Researchers studying the social mechanisms that kept hunter-gatherer bands from tipping into chaos have documented a real toolkit deployed against people who would not correct themselves. Mockery, pointed jokes, routines of collective laughter aimed at exactly one target. If gossip was the whisper campaign, ridicule was the public trial with no defense attorney. Among hunters across multiple documented societies, a man who bragged too much about a kill might find his catch mocked to his face by the very people he expected to praise him. The meat insulted, the hunter deflated on purpose in front of everyone. Point that same mechanism at someone who would not stop chasing another person's spouse, and you get something closer to a public flogging with words instead of a whip. It left no mark on the skin. It left something else. Here is where the mirror gets uncomfortable. You still do this. You have watched someone get quietly torn apart in a group chat, in a comment section, in the particular silence a room makes when someone walks in that everyone has just been discussing. We did not invent social punishment. We inherited it and barely modified the mechanism. We just changed its range from 30 people to 3 million. If you are recognizing the machinery under your social life right now, you are exactly the kind of person this channel is built for. Subscribe now, because the next rung is where this stops being about words. Because ridicule did not always work. And when it failed, the band still had one question to answer before anyone reached for real violence. Could this person still be trusted enough to stay? The next rung was exclusion, and it came in degrees. Sometimes small, a family that quietly stopped sharing meat with you, a hunting party that left without waiting. Sometimes it hardened into full ostracism, which researchers studying egalitarian societies describe as a real, structured sanction, temporary exile from the group's daily life, a suspension of the bonds that fed you, sheltered you, kept watch while you slept. The anthropologist Christopher Bohm, after decades studying how small-scale societies police bad behavior without formal authority, documented ostracism as exactly that, a practice on the ladder between ridicule and the very last rung of all. Understand what exclusion actually cost. In a hunter-gatherer band, you did not survive alone, not for long. Food was shared because one bad hunting week could kill you without other people's surplus. Watch was kept in shifts because a predator needed only one unguarded hour. A person cut off from that web was exposed in the most literal sense the word has ever had. Exclusion could cost you your life, slowly, through cold, through hunger, through the absence of the 100 small forms of help you never had to ask for because you had always simply belonged. This is why most people climbed back down the ladder the moment they felt exclusion coming. A public apology, real restitution, months of correct behavior. The ladder was almost always designed to be climbed down, and that mattered more than the threat above it. Almost always, not always. There is a rung above exclusion, and the honest thing to tell you is that it was rare, but real. When someone would not stop, when their behavior kept threatening the whole band's stability, some societies crossed into physical punishment, and in the rarest cases, execution. The same cross-cultural survey that found reputational punishment dominant in egalitarian bands found the opposite pattern here. Execution, as a sanction, showed up most where societies had grown more socially stratified, with recognized authority to carry out that sentence. This tells you something the popular imagination usually gets backward. The clubbing caveman image is not what the evidence shows as typical. It shows up disproportionately in societies that had already moved away from the small, flat, gossip-governed bands, where humans spent most of their evolutionary history. Bohm's broader research on egalitarian societies describes the same graduated logic across different peoples for different offenses: teasing, then ridicule, then shunning, then expulsion, then rarely the group itself, acting together rather than through any single judge, delivering the final sentence. Other researchers push back on how collective this really was, arguing punishment often looked more like an aggrieved partner, or their kin, settling a private score than a community enforcing shared rules. Both patterns appear in the honest record. What stayed constant was the escalation itself. Nobody went straight to the top rung because the ladder existed so that almost nobody had to. Think about what that means for the world you live in now. The rungs still exist. You still feel the sting of being talked about, still feel a room deciding something about you before a word is said aloud, but the floor underneath has changed completely. You can survive being gossiped about, survive being excluded from one group because there are 1,000 others to join. Your ancestors mostly could not. For them, the ladder was a real structure with real consequences at every step, built by people who had no other way to keep 30 individuals cooperating well enough to make it through one more winter together. We inherited every rung. The whisper, the joke that lands too hard, the group that goes quiet when you walk in, even in its rarest form, the impulse toward violence when nothing else works. We built those instincts because for most of our history, betrayal was a direct threat to everyone who depended on trusting each other completely, with nowhere else to go. You do not live in that world anymore, but something in you was built inside it, rung by rung, fire by fire, and it never entirely left. So the next time you feel the sting of being talked about, or the cold ache of a group closing ranks without a single word, ask yourself which rung of an ancient ladder you are standing on, and what it once meant to climb any higher.